Michael looked me straight in the eye and said, "Mom, you're old. You should just disappear before you mess up my life." His voice was cold, like a blade pressed to someone's throat, firm, as if I was born just to be stomped down by my own child. I stood still, my eyes unblinking. I didn't flinch, didn't grovel, didn't try to justify anything. In that moment when he thought he had backed me into a corner, all I heard was the sound of my heart dropping a level, then tightening like a steel trap ready to snap shut. I told myself if Michael wanted to turn my life into a stage so he could play the role of the devoted son caring for a senile mother, then I'd give him a performance that would turn into his worst nightmare. And when the curtain fell, he'd be the one dragged into the light, exposed, filthy, and with nowhere left to run. Think about it. What would you do if one day the person you love most looks at you like you're an expired product, then says that to your face? Would you stand there and take the humiliation, or would you rise and make them pay for every word that just left their mouth? Leave a comment, because what you just read is only the opening act. The next part will leave you breathless. And trust me, this son has no idea who he's about to go up against. I still remember that afternoon with a heaviness pressing beneath my sternum, as if my body had sensed something was about to happen. How could I forget that everything began with a small, simple action that carried no warning of danger? I took Isabella's cracked phone to Leo's repair shop, thinking it was nothing more than helping my daughter-in-law with a small errand. The shattered glass spread like a spider web, the fractured lines catching the shop lights in a way that made me briefly think of the times Isabella spoke to me with a smile that had been cracked long before I ever noticed. Leo looked up when I walked in, his expression brightening with recognition. I had taught his mother back at my old school, so he still called me Miss Grant with a mix of respect and familiarity. I told him Isabella had dropped her phone, that she needed it urgently for work, and Leo agreed to fix it the same day. There was no sign, none, that he was about to say something that would change my entire life. He took the phone, opened his diagnostic software as part of his routine, then suddenly stopped. Leo's breaths grew shorter, his movements slowed. I asked if there was a problem, and he simply looked at me, an expression carrying a faint warning. Before I could ask again, Leo lowered his voice and told me to step behind the counter. Tension spread across his features, as if something on the screen required careful thought before showing it to me. He inhaled deeply, set the phone on the table, and tapped on a hidden folder buried deep in the storage. Its name was Plan B. I barely had time to grasp anything before Leo whispered that he'd found it by accident while testing the touchscreen. His face had gone pale, and the first thing he said sent cold chills down my spine. "Miss Grant, something is very wrong. You need to see this." I looked at the screen and everything inside me sagged. The messages appeared line by line, word by word, not from strangers, not from anonymous threats. They were messages between Isabella and my own son, Michael. They were discussing a plan so chilling that just reading the first line tightened my heart. This time, we have to finish it. "She's starting to slip." I froze in place. The words were sharp, carving a long cut through my mind, and I couldn't believe my own eyes. Leo stood beside me, trembling faintly. He scrolled through more messages, and in front of me appeared sentences beyond imagination. Michael said the timing was right, and Isabella replied with a cold, eager excitement. They were talking about me, about Arthur, about making their move while no one suspected. They had compared different ways I could die in the most natural-looking manner possible, from falling down the stairs to overdosing on blood pressure medication. Each method was calmly listed, bullet point after bullet point, as if they felt nothing about the fact that the person they were planning to eliminate was his mother. I gasped for breath, needing to grip the counter to keep my body from collapsing. Leo placed a steadying hand on mine, trying to help me control my breathing. He spoke in a voice ragged from fear. "You need to cancel your cards, change every password, and then run. Go far before they make their move." I looked at Leo the way someone drowning looks at the last piece of driftwood in an icy ocean. But the cruelest blow wasn't his warning. It was the next message on the screen, a message from Michael. "Mom is starting to slip. Perfect timing." I couldn't hear anything around me anymore. It was as if the air had stopped moving. Every word Michael typed felt like a slap across the entire lifetime I had spent raising him into the man he'd become. I remembered every moment of his childhood, when he had fevers, the nights I stayed awake worrying, the efforts Arthur and I poured into him. And now he looked at me as nothing more than a burden to be removed. Leo tapped the screen again. Isabella had created an appointment in an app. Its name made my blood turn to ice. Portland Memory Care Center. The appointment was set for this week. I had never heard either Isabella or Michael mention anything related to this place. I went still for several seconds, the feeling of betrayal seeping into my muscles, making them tremble. I tried to find an explanation, tried to cling to the fragile hope that this was some kind of system error, that Michael couldn't possibly be this cold-blooded. But the truth laid out before me offered no escape. Leo was still talking, but my ears were ringing dull and distant. I forced myself to focus and read through the final messages. I needed to know just how far this had gone. And then I saw them. Messages no mother on earth should ever have to read. Isabella wrote that everything had been prepared to look like an accident, that I would be sent off gently, and that no one would suspect anything because the medical records had been taken care of thoroughly. I clenched my fists so hard the tendons in my fingers stood out. A numbness swept across my face as Leo opened the final message. Just 3 words, but they opened a bottomless pit beneath my feet. "Tomorrow night works." My body felt as though it dropped straight into a void. My heart squeezed tight. Tomorrow. I hadn't even had time to think, to react, to defend myself. Everything was already that close. I understood in that exact moment that from here on out, every breath I took carried danger. There was no time left to doubt, no time left to hesitate. All I had left was the life of myself and Arthur held precariously between my own 2 hands. But one burning question hung in my mind as I looked up at Leo, a question that made me shudder the moment I spoke it aloud. How can a child schedule the night his mother dies like he's booking an appointment? And as soon as the words left my lips, I knew the nightmare had only just begun. I left the phone repair shop like a shadow, unable to recall how I walked out the door. In my head, only one sound remained, a single trembling string replaying Michael's last message over and over. I drove home vaguely recognizing the familiar white porch, but feeling like I was returning to a house that no longer belonged to me. Arthur was sitting in the living room, glancing up at the sound of the door, his expression so peaceful it made my chest tighten. I stood there for a long time, unsure how to begin, unable to find a single sentence that could prepare him for the collapse that was coming. I approached Arthur and placed my phone on the table, my hand still trembling from the pain twisting inside. He looked at me, and that one look told me he knew I was about to tear his world apart. I opened the photos I had taken in the repair shop, each one so clear I regretted being the one to capture them. When Arthur picked up the phone, his eyes squinted, trying to read every word carefully, searching for a mistake. He hadn't even finished when his voice cracked. "No way, Eleanor. He can't be this cruel." I thought I would cry, but my body no longer had the strength to shed tears. I watched Arthur grip the phone so tightly, the veins on his hands stood out. And in his eyes, I saw the same pain I had just swallowed, the pain of a father realizing his son was no longer the boy he once protected. He tried to keep reading, but then he dropped the phone onto the table as if it had scorched his hand. I sat beside Arthur, placing my hand on his knee, wanting to say something comforting, only to realize there was no word soft enough to cover a wound this deep. Arthur bowed his head, his shoulders sagging, and a heavy silence stretched between us. I opened my laptop to check the bank account, a chilling thought having crossed my mind. I typed the password with hands no longer steady. When the transaction list appeared, my heart sank. There were numerous small withdrawals occurring weekly, each a few $100s. The final total showed nearly $15,000 gone. Arthur leaned in to look, and I heard him exhale sharply, the sound of a man realizing he'd been deceived by someone he trusted more than anyone else. "Michael has PO, Arthur said, voice tight. "We signed it over when you had surgery last year, you remember?" I did. That moment felt like it had just happened yesterday. Amidst our fears about my health, Michael had stood there gentle, saying he wanted to ease our burden. We gave him control over our finances, believing it came from love. And now, seeing those unfamiliar transactions, I realized I had handed him the key that allowed him to end us. Arthur rose and walked to the window, looking out at the garden he tended every morning. His back trembled, the kind of shaking that came from someone who had always stood like a wall. I stepped closer, placed a hand on his shoulder, and felt the struggle he was trying to suppress. It wasn't weakness. It was the crumbling of a trust built over 40 years. "What did I do wrong with him?" Arthur said softly, pain etched into every word. "Why would he do this to you, Eleanor?" I bit my lip to keep the sob from rising. I opened my email, searching for anything that might reveal another side of Michael, hoping he still had a shred of conscience. But what I found only made the air in my lungs tighten. A new email had arrived from an address I recognized as the insurance company's. The subject line was plain, but sharp like a steel hook to the heart. "Updated insurance policy for Eleanor Grant." I opened it. A PDF file appeared. I saw my name, the policy number, and a payout so large I froze, and the signature at the bottom. It was mine, but a distorted version, stiff and unnatural, wrong in 3 distinct places. Even if it had been expertly altered, I would always recognize my own handwriting. I sat in silence. Eleanor Arthur turned quickly at the sound of my broken breath. He bent to look at the screen, his eyes widening when he read the name of the sole beneficiary. Michael Grant. No one else. Not Arthur. Not any family. Only Michael. Arthur stepped back as if someone had punched him in the chest. I tried to steady him, but my hand was shaking too badly to lift. The room seemed to close in, and all I could hear was the thud of my own heartbeat pounding through my temples. We sat down on the couch, surrounded by a silence so thick it made the air feel heavy. Every tie between Michael and me was being snapped one by one, not just because of the messages, not just because of the money. Not because of the POA or the forged document, but because of something far worse. Michael had set all of this in motion long ago, with deliberate planning, without hesitation or confusion. He had viewed Arthur and me as 2 items to be crossed out on his agenda. I wanted to scream or smash something, but in that moment, the rage crystallized into a coldness that seeped deep into my spine. It numbed every emotion I had left, just enough to keep me awake. Arthur placed his hand over mine and gave a gentle squeeze. We both knew the truth was now unmistakable. Michael was no longer the boy we had once held close. He had become someone I could no longer call anything but a stranger. While Arthur tried to steady himself, I looked down at my phone, a weight settling in my chest like someone had pulled a curtain of night across my heart. I wanted to cling to any remaining hope that Michael still had some humanity, but just then the phone vibrated. A new notification from Isabella lit up the lock screen. "Don't forget your evening meds, Mom. You don't want to get another headache." I stared at that message, and a sharp chill surged through me. I had never taken the kind of medication Isabella was referring to. I had never asked her to look after my pill schedule. And yet now she was sending reminders like it had been our routine all along. I looked up at Arthur, and I knew we both understood exactly what it meant. This wasn't care. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a signal, a sign that they were ready for the next step, a step they wanted me to take without question. I set the phone down on the table. A cold thread uncoiled in my stomach, crept up into my chest, then lodged in my throat. A vivid instinct flared inside me, pounding like a warning shouted from somewhere deep within. If I took that pill, I would not wake up. And in that moment, I understood something with painful clarity. Everything had already crossed a line there was no returning from. The war had begun, and I had little time left to choose how I would survive. I spent the entire morning trying to keep my body from trembling under a fear that rose and sank like an underground current. The truth I uncovered from last night's messages still stabbed at every bone, making me feel as if I were walking on shattering glass. Arthur sat in the living room longer than usual, his eyes blankly following the ceiling fan's rotation, occasionally glancing at the door as if waiting for a cold wind to blow in. We both knew Isabella would come for her phone sooner or later, and that moment would be the first time I'd have to look directly into the face of someone plotting to kill me. The doorbell rang and both Arthur and I flinched. He stood up instinctively, but I placed my hand over his and gave it a gentle squeeze. "Let me," I whispered. I walked to the door holding my breath, my hand resting on the cold doorknob. When I opened it, Isabella stood there, flawless to the point of terror. Her smile showed no warmth, no softness, no natural curve resembling a human expression. It was fixed in place, as if sculpted from wax and pasted onto her face. "Eleanor, thank you for getting the phone repaired. I really appreciate it," Isabella said with a voice as light as cellophane, but devoid of warmth. She reached out to touch the doorframe, as though the house had belonged to her all along. I handed her the phone. "Leo fixed it quickly. Check if everything's working." Isabella took the phone with a hand that was both soft and cold, her eyes scanning the screen as if inspecting it for traces. The way she studied it made me shiver, as if she were probing to see whether I had discovered what she tried to hide. She looked up at me, her dark brown eyes curving slightly, reminding me of the stray cats Arthur used to chase from the garden. "Do you remember what day it is today, Michael? Says you've been mixing up bidets lately." My throat tightened, but I didn't let anything show. I had prepared for this. I inhaled gently, the way I used to before facing difficult parents at school meetings. "Thursday," I replied quietly, but I said it wrong on purpose. In reality, it was Friday. Isabella didn't miss a beat. Just as I predicted, she tilted her head with an expression that blended pity and judgment. "No, it's Friday. You're mistaken," she said. But behind that tone was a flicker of delight she thought I wouldn't notice, the thrill of someone confirming a piece of her plan. I smiled faintly, the kind of smile I hated because it made me look weaker than I wanted. My eyes must have misread the calendar, I said. Thank you. Isabella's eyes flickered as if she mentally jotted something down in my mind once more. A faint sliver of satisfaction flashed in her eyes before vanishing, replaced by that practiced politeness she had perfected over the years. I invited her in, but Isabella shook her head. I have to run. Big presentation tomorrow, you know, she said, still wearing that adhesive smile. She turned away, and that was when I saw it, her silk scarf, the kind she always wore. There was a small, dark brown stain near the fold, nearly hidden. It chilled me to the bone because it looked exactly like the strange powder I'd seen on the kitchen counter a few days ago. Back then, I naively thought I had spilled cinnamon or cocoa while cooking. But now, staring at that stain on Isabella's scarf, I knew it wasn't a coincidence, and it wasn't a spice. "There's something on your scarf," I said softly, pointing at the stained area. Isabella flinched for a fraction of a second, so quickly that if I hadn't been a teacher used to reading even the subtlest student expressions, I might have missed it. She twisted the scarf and brushed it with her finger too hastily. The color smeared across her skin before she pressed the scarf to her neck as if hiding something. "Probably coffee," Isabella replied, her voice too quick to be natural. I looked at her, feeling the tension between us thicken. She knew I saw the stain. I knew she was unsettled, but neither of us mentioned it again. We stood within what seemed like a normal distance, but was filled with suspicion. Isabella said goodbye and stepped down the stairs. I watched her every step, trying to memorize every detail. Her hair neatly tied back, spine straight, hand gripping the phone almost fused to her side. She looked like a statue carved from cold stone. But when she thought I wasn't watching, she glanced back quickly. And in that fleeting moment, I caught her true gaze. It wasn't the gaze of a polite daughter-in-law. It was sharp as a blade and deep as a well, a glint like metal catching sunlight emerging from within. That moment lasted only a beat before vanishing, replaced by her charming smile, as if I had imagined everything. But I knew I hadn't. She had just checked to see whether I had caught on. And I understood that from now on, I'd have to outplay her twice over. I shut the door and leaned against it, trying to steady my breathing. Arthur looked at me from the living room, his eyes filled with questions he didn't dare speak. I walked over to him, placed a hand on the back of his chair to hide the tremble in my fingers. "She tested me," I said, my voice low but clear. "And I think she suspects something." Arthur frowned. "Suspects what, Eleanor?" "That I know." Arthur gripped the armrest, his knuckles turning white. There were too many things we hadn't had time to analyze, but one truth stood firm before us. Isabella wasn't just someone Michael had roped in. She was the cold mind standing beside him, possibly even more dangerous than him. I stepped into the kitchen and opened the cabinet to get a glass of water. But when my eyes landed on the medicine shelf, a strange feeling halted my breath. I reached for the cabinet door and scanned each familiar bottle. I always kept the heart medication in the middle, vitamins to the right, and blood pressure pills on the left. It was an arrangement I had maintained for years, known only to Arthur. But today, their positions had changed. The heart meds were pushed upward. The blood pressure pills are placed at the front. The vitamins were missing. A bottle I had never seen before sat in the middle, its label pale green with a medical font hard to read. I reached out but stopped halfway. Something cold crept through my chest, making my breath lighter than usual. Arthur stood behind me about to speak, but I turned to him, and my eyes said what I couldn't bring myself to say aloud. My medication shelf had been tampered with. I stared at that unfamiliar bottle, feeling a phantom thread tighten around my throat. One question cut through my mind like a blade. Who had gone through my medicine cabinet? And what were they trying to do? I walked out of the kitchen, my hand still numb from touching the tampered medicine bottles. The dull fear that had been festering in me for the past 2 days now surged like a toxic gust. Every small detail fused into an irreversible truth. The plot against me had gone far beyond the messages on Isabella's phone. It had entered my home, my medicine cabinet, the things I once thought no one but me would ever touch. Arthur walked beside me, his steps slowing as worry made him lose balance slightly. We sat down, and I knew there was something I couldn't postpone any longer. I had to confront Alistair Reed. I picked up the phone and dialed the clinic. The nurse's voice came on familiar and cheerful, as it always was when I stopped by for blood pressure checks or routine follow-ups. I said I needed to see Dr. Reed because of dizziness. Once the appointment was confirmed, I hung up and sat still for a few seconds. Each heartbeat reminded me that time was tightening like a noose around my neck. The ride to the clinic wasn't long, but the car moved inch by inch, tightening the tension in me. I no longer trusted what I used to believe. I sat in the waiting room, my nerves burning while my face strained to stay composed. When the door opened and Alistair appeared, I wondered if the man in front of me was still a friend or a link in the chain meant to finish me off. "Eleanor, you came without notice," Alistair smiled, but the smile was off, as if he wasn't entirely at ease. I stepped into the office, sensing the air was thicker than usual. Alistair sat across from me, and I placed one hand on the table to keep myself grounded. He asked the usual polite questions about sleep, appetite, and mood. But I didn't engage with pleasantries. I cut straight to the point. "Alistair, you recorded in my file that I showed signs of memory loss, didn't you?" His shoulders stiffened. His eyes flicked to the clipboard, then back at me like he was scrambling for an excuse. "Eleanor, that wasn't my independent evaluation. Michael sent me some information. He was worried. I just made a note to monitor it." I paused, then spoke slowly and clearly. "You noted it down without examining me, without asking me, without a test. You took what he said and wrote it in my medical record like it was fact." Alistair swallowed. "Michael said you were missing appointments, forgetting medications, and losing your sense of direction. He even sent a video as proof." A chill crawled down my spine. "Video?" He turned the computer screen toward me. A clip played. I saw myself in the kitchen, standing at the counter. Michael, his voice gentle but unfamiliar, asked, "Mom, what day is it?" I gave the wrong answer. Then I dropped a spoon, bent to pick it up, and forgot what I was cooking. The video seemed so real. I had to mentally count each detail to spot the flaw. The camera angle was too steady, no shaking at all, which told me it had been fixed in place, not handheld. "You believe this?" I asked, my voice lowered. Michael said, "You just don't want to admit it. And many people in early stages feel the same," Alistair said. But I saw true confusion in his eyes. He was beginning to realize something didn't align with any medical standard he trusted. "You're signing my death warrant, Alistair," I said, each word falling like cold stone. "You labeled me as senile, left a trace that would explain any accident." "Do you even know what that serves?" Alistair turned pale. His hands touched the desk as if to steady himself. "Eleanor, I didn't think it was this serious. I just noted what the family reported. I haven't confirmed anything, no diagnosis yet. Michael said he was concerned for his mother. I didn't know." "Didn't know?" I leaned in. My eyes locked on his face. "Well, now you do. You've been used. I've been given a disease I don't have. And the file you wrote is now the excuse they'll use to kill me." The room went so silent I could hear the faint ticking of a ceiling light. After a few seconds, Alistair stood, staggered over to the filing cabinet, and pulled out an old stack of papers. He exhaled hard, then reprinted the entire medical file, removing all inaccurate notes. His hands shook visibly as he handed the new documents to me. "Eleanor, I'm sorry. I'll fix everything."
I'll write that I've examined you personally and your cognitive health is completely intact. I looked at him, no longer angry, just a bitterness lodged deep in my chest. Good, because if I die in some fake accident, your file will be the first thing the police look at. Alistair bowed his head, his face drained from real fear. Not of me, but because he now understood that Michael had dragged him into a crime he never knew he was aiding. I took the file, placed it in my bag, and stood up. Just as I reached the door, Alistair called out, "Eleanor, do you want me to call the police?" I turned back. "Not yet, but I'll tell you when I do." I left the clinic feeling surrounded by unease, as if the air itself had eyes watching me. I walked to my car, opened the door with a hand no longer steady. I placed my bag on the passenger seat, inhaled deeply to keep my heart from bursting. Just as I started the engine, my phone buzzed. An incoming call. The screen showed a name that to any mother in the world would evoke love. But now, as that name blinked, my blood ran cold. Michael. I hesitated a second, then picked up. "Mom," his voice rang through the speaker, gentle enough that if I didn't know what he'd done, I might have believed he was still the boy I once cradled. "Where are you?" "Why do you ask?" I said, holding my tone as calm as possible. Michael chuckled softly. "I want to take you out to dinner. It's been a while since we all sat together. Tonight?" "Okay, tonight." His voice too composed, too soft, too pristine, as if not a single stain ever touched his mind. That calmness made my heartbeat stutter, because the one inviting me to dinner was the same person planning the day he'd kill me. And that calm was the mark of someone who believed everything was going according to plan. In that moment, I understood this dinner wasn't an invitation. It was a warning wrapped in silk. A test to see whether I was still playing the role he'd assigned me. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, keeping my voice level as I answered, "Let me check my schedule." Michael said softly, "Don't worry, Mom. You don't need to remember much. I'll remember for you." That sentence sent ice down my spine. His tone was so even that a stranger might think he truly cared. But I knew better than anyone that those words were a metal hook dragging me into the play he'd scripted. The call ended with a whispered, "See you tonight," soft as a lullaby. I stared at the darkened phone screen, my breath quivering inside a chest I struggled to keep from letting out a sound. Nightfall came quicker than I wanted. I stood in the kitchen stirring the tomato sauce as my mind kept circling back to the deadly appointment Michael had planted in this afternoon's call. Arthur helped set the table, his movements slow, as if trying to keep each plate from trembling. The silence between us wasn't a void, but a thick atmosphere made of unnamed worries. The doorbell rang just as I placed the bread tray on the table. Arthur looked at me, asking more with his eyes than his voice. I nodded slightly and went to answer. Outside, Michael stood upright, his smile gentle and polite to the point of being fake. Beside him, Isabella cradled a small basket with two things I'd grown used to from her flair, a rare bottle of red wine and an imported box of chocolate wrapped in lace. "Mom and Dad will love this one," Michael said, holding the wine bottle toward me. "It's mild, just a few sips and Mom will sleep like a baby." His words felt like ice down my spine, but I smiled, trying to make it look like the weary smile of an aging, confused woman. My hands trembled slightly as I took the bottle on purpose, letting him see. "Oh, thank you, dear. I've been having trouble sleeping lately."
I saw a flicker of satisfaction in Michael's eyes, just long enough to know he bought into my act. Isabella stepped into the house, leaving behind a trail of soft perfume wrapped around the chill in her face.
Eleanor, I picked these chocolates carefully, all high quality. Try some, see if they suit your taste. Arthur waited by the door, trying to appear calm, but I noticed his fingers pressing into the edge of the table. He offered a few polite words and returned to the dining room. Michael and Isabella followed, their eyes scanning the house like they were checking for irregularities. I sat down first, fully committing to the role of a forgetful woman. When I placed the napkin on my lap, I intentionally dropped it, just to observe their reactions. Isabella tilted her head slightly, as if confirming something in her mind. Michael offered a faint smile, his gaze dripping with false sympathy. We began the meal. I picked up some spaghetti, my hand trembling slightly, so artificial. I felt a lump form in my throat. I wasn't hungry, but I knew I had to pretend I still had some appetite, just enough to make Michael believe in my confusion. Michael poured the wine, his manner calm, like a devoted host. He poured for Arthur first, then Isabella, and finally for me. As the bottle tilted toward my glass, I felt my heart pound in my chest. Then I saw it. A faint white swirl settled at the bottom of the glass before the red fully blended in. A faint streak, small but visible enough to nearly choke me. I glanced, then slowly lifted the glass as if I hadn't noticed anything. Arthur, sitting across, caught my eye for just a second. He understood immediately. His hand shifted slightly beneath the table, adjusting the tiny recorder on the secret chair so the mic pointed directly upward. The meal dragged on like a silent interrogation. Isabella spoke of work, of new projects, but her eyes never left me. She observed each time I leaned forward, each way I held my fork, every flicker of fear she thought I was trying to hide. But what I was really hiding was my clarity. Midway through dinner, Isabella leaned toward me, set down her fork, and spoke in a soft tone, sharp as a needle. Eleanor, Michael and I have decided we'll handle the finances from now on. You don't need to worry anymore, so you can rest your mind. Arthur's grip on his knife tightened so hard his knuckles turned white. I bit my lip, then looked at Isabella, trying to let my eyes drift slightly. Oh, is that so? I have been a bit confused with money lately. Michael chuckled, confident enough to straighten up in his seat. See, I told you, Mom's already getting mixed up. Let us handle it. You just need to rest, eat well, and sleep. I thought of the forged insurance documents, of the money disappearing from my account, of the appointments at memory care centers I never knew I had. I thought of the way Isabella looked at me last night, smiling softly while her eyes sliced like blades. And then I thought of the white streak in the wine glass. Arthur kept recording, his hand still but tense beneath the table. I knew he was trying to stay calm enough not to crush the glass in front of him. "We're doing this for you, Mom," Michael continued. "You can't keep up with complicated things anymore." He spoke with the voice of someone who had already laid the lid on a coffin and was ready to nail it shut. I paid attention to every word, every pitch in his tone. I forced a tremble, a hint of confusion, just enough for him to feel he was winning. I guess I'm a little tired," I murmured. "Then have some wine," Michael said, quickly reaching out to lightly tap the stem of my glass. "To help you relax." Isabella smiled faintly. "Just a sip, Mom." I lifted the glass, swirling it gently. The white streak was no longer visible, but I knew it was still there, hidden in the red like a whisper of death. The air around the table thickened. The wine's aroma mixed with a metallic scent I could only sense, not see.
Arthur looked at me with a kind of worry I hadn't seen since I lay in post-op all those years ago. I raised the glass to my lips but didn't sip. I tilted it slightly, like someone assessing the bouquet. Michael watched every movement with the patient focus of a predator waiting for its prey to collapse. I slowly set the glass down. "The scent's a bit strong," I said.
"It's not," replied his voice so smooth it made me shiver. "Just a few sips, you'll sleep well." I could feel every cell in my body screaming, wanting to rise and flip the entire table. But I held it in, wrapping everything into a faint tremor, just right for the character I had to keep playing. Isabella slid the box of chocolates toward me. "Try one, Mom. This flavor pairs well with the wine." I reached out and opened the box. Inside was a row of glossy brown chocolates neatly arranged as if fresh from a luxury boutique. But on closer inspection, one piece had a slightly different shade, a lighter brown, not obvious enough for a casual observer to notice, but enough for me to know something was hidden beneath that shell. Michael stared at me, his eyes widening slightly, as if bracing to witness the moment I slipped into whatever state he'd engineered. I sensed Arthur holding his breath behind me. The recorder kept running, capturing every word, every breath, every deadly silence across the table. I turned to Michael and offered a pale smile, making it look just unstable enough. The tension in his face eased ever so slightly, convinced I was about to lift the glass. And just then, Michael tilted his head, his lips curling into a barely visible line. "Drink, Mom. Let's make it a cheerful evening." The next morning when I woke up and saw the dry white streak still at the bottom of last night's wine glass, I knew I couldn't afford to be weak for even one more second. Dinner with Michael and Isabella made it clear they were ready to strike at any time, possibly right at the very table Arthur and I had shared for 40 years. Arthur stood by the window, arms crossed, his eyes stripped of their usual calm, replaced by a thick layer of tension. He turned when he heard my footsteps, and just one subtle shake of his head was enough for me to understand we couldn't keep waiting to see what those two would do next. We had to act first. I sat down at the table and reopened the images of the messages from Isabella's phone. Each word sliced into my mind like a blade. Arthur placed a hand on my shoulder, but it was cold with worry. "Eleanor, we need someone who knows how to deal with this kind of scheming," he said. And at that moment, a name came to me, one I had often heard mentioned at former teachers' gatherings, Attorney Evelyn Hayes, a woman known for her uncompromising stance on family fraud cases, someone sharp enough to see the malice most people would miss. Evelyn's office was in a modest building with nothing flashy on the outside, but the silence inside the meeting room commanded absolute seriousness. When Evelyn walked in, I immediately understood why people called her a standing blade. She wasn't tall, but her eyes gleamed like polished metal, and her voice was so calm and low, it made everyone instinctively adjust their breath. "Eleanor Grant," she said as she shook my hand, her grip firm, like she was holding on to a truth she had already anticipated before I uttered a word. "I read your email, but I need you to tell me everything in your own words. Leave nothing out." I told her everything from the beginning: Isabella's phone, the Plan B folder, the plot to kill Arthur and me, the fake medical records for Alistair Reed, the withdrawn funds, the forged signature on the insurance policy, and the dinner laced with attempted murder. Evelyn listened without blinking, her gaze peeling back each hidden layer of meaning behind every detail. When I mentioned the white streak in the wine Michael poured and the oddly colored chocolate, her eyes flashed with a coldness I had never seen in anyone. She put her pen down, laced her fingers on the table, and looked me straight in the eye. You don't run, Evelyn said with a calmness so sharp I felt like a thin blade had grazed my chest. You fight. I exhaled deeply as if someone had slapped me awake. Fight? How? When my own son wants to kill me? I asked. Evelyn slid her chair forward slightly, legally, strategically, by peeling back each layer they're hiding behind. You can't let them control the narrative. You have to take it. She opened a pre-prepared folder. Step 1, revoke Michael's full POA. He can't be allowed to touch your finances for even another second. Step 2, freeze all accounts. Shift to maximum protection. Any transaction must require both your and Arthur's presence. I nodded, feeling the cold blood in my veins begin to heat. Step 3, Evelyn continued, you must rewrite your will. If you die, Michael will receive nothing. Everything will go straight to a charity under your name. Her words took the air out of my lungs for a moment. Part of me ached that it had come to this, defending myself against my own son like he was a predator. But another part knew Evelyn was right. If Michael wanted me dead for money, I had to make my death utterly meaningless to him. Evelyn looked at me and continued, her tone chillingly composed. We need to take away his motive. Arthur placed his hand on the table, gently squeezing mine. I knew he was hurting just as much, but his eyes were fierce, as if reminding himself that we still had each other, and that was enough to stand and fight. Evelyn stood up, pulled out a thick stack of documents from the cabinet, and placed them in front of me. Sign here, here, and here. I'll handle the rest. But be prepared. Once you start pulling power away, they'll realize you're more aware than they thought. Before I could react, Evelyn opened her laptop, searched for a few minutes, then turned the screen toward me. There's something you need to know. In the past 3 days, Michael has been looking up online consultations about elderly stair falls. I felt my chest tighten. Stair falls are hard to prove as being caused by external force, Evelyn added, unless you have prior evidence. I stared at the screen, reading the questions Michael had submitted. How to stage a believable stair fall, how to cause a fall without signs of resistance, which pressure points result in the most severe injury. Each question shoved me closer to the truth. Michael had been planning this for a long time, with the kind of precision that left no room for suspicion. I don't know how long it took for me to breathe normally again, but when I signed every sheet Evelyn handed me, I felt as though I was gripping a blade to cut the final thread that bound me to the Michael I once knew. Evelyn watched me finish signing, then stood, placing a hand gently on my shoulder. You did the right thing, she said. From this point forward, we go on the offensive. She paused for a beat, then spoke to Arthur. You need to prepare yourself too. Once they see she's not so easy to manipulate, they'll try another way. Arthur nodded. The fear had left his eyes. In its place, I saw the fury of a betrayed father and the unwavering resolve to protect the woman he loved. We left Evelyn's office that afternoon. The sky wasn't bright, nor was it dark, as if even it was waiting to see what would happen next. Arthur and I sat in the car for a few minutes in silence. I wondered what had snapped inside Michael's mind to make him see my death as a reasonable option. But then I told myself I couldn't dwell on questions with no answers. I had to stay sharp because Evelyn was right. They'd try something soon. We returned home just as the last bit of sunlight slipped off the front steps. I went into the kitchen to make Arthur some tea, my hands trembling slightly, but my heart slowly regaining control. A long night lay ahead, and I knew the silence wasn't peace. It was just the stillness before the storm. Arthur sat across from me, scanning every detail of the room as if to make sure nothing else had been disturbed. We waited. The next morning, I was slicing fruit in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. Arthur lowered his newspaper and looked toward me. I took a deep breath, wiped my hands, and walked to the door. I opened it, and Isabella was standing there. Her smile was so soft, it looked like it might fall off her face, and her voice floated like a breeze. "Eleanor, I brought some papers for you to sign to ease your financial worries." I looked down at the folder in her hands. The words on the cover hit me like a punch. Full power of attorney, indefinite. Isabella brought the papers closer, as if worried I hadn't read clearly. Her smile stayed fixed, but her eyes underneath were as cold as stagnant water. Isabella stood at my door with a thick stack of documents, her smile wide, but her eyes cold, as if just waiting for my nod to tighten the noose. I looked down at the papers and saw my name printed right above the line for unlimited power of attorney, the forged handwriting clumsily mimicking my signature. I took a deep breath, feeling every drop of blood in my body converge into a single point in my chest. It wasn't fear, it was fury. I opened the door wider and invited her in, playing the tone of a manipulable old woman, but inside I had steeled like tempered iron. Arthur stood in the living room, his eyes tracking Isabella's every step, like he was watching a thief who had just broken in. I knew he was holding back a lot, but if he could just stay calm a little longer, the tide would turn. I placed the folder on the dining table, sat down, and flattened the edge of the paper with a slow, deliberate motion, applying pressure by design. Isabella stood opposite me, hands lightly resting on the back of a chair, her lips still slightly curved. "Mom, sign here," she said, tilting her head like someone patiently explaining something to a child. That line almost made me laugh. I pointed at the top clause and spoke in a calm voice as sharp as a razor. "Read each provision to me." I saw her freeze, and for a brief moment, the smile on her face hardened like cold jelly. "You need me to read it to you?" Isabella asked back, her voice slightly raised, as if trying to reignite the image of the confused old lady she'd carefully built over the past months. I looked up, stared her straight in the eye, and held the silence long enough to make the air between us thicken. "Yes," I said, "read it all." Isabella bit her lip lightly, trying to maintain composure, then began reading each clause in a voice tinged with impatience. I listened to the smooth phrases about control over my assets, access to bank accounts, the right to sign documents on my behalf, rights of transfer, medical decisions, and residence. Every word that fell from her mouth was like a pebble dropped into a deep well, and each echo revealed her true nature. When she reached the clause granting the agent full authority to place me in any care facility for safety reasons, I cut her off. "That's enough." I pushed the documents back toward her and pulled from my bag the updated medical file Dr. Reed had finalized yesterday. "Before I sign anything," I said, "you might want to look at this." I placed the officially stamped report right in front of Isabella. What lay there laid the truth bare, Dr. Honks. Reed confirmed I was fully lucid with no signs of cognitive decline, and prior notes had been amended due to inaccurate third-party information. As Isabella's eyes scanned that line, her expression shifted so suddenly it was as if I had slapped her across the face. She visibly paled, blood draining from her lips, her hands clutching the chair edge until her knuckles turned white. In that moment, I saw the mask she wore crack for the first time. "What is this?" Isabella blurted out, her voice shrill and tinged with panic. "What are you doing? You're hurting yourself, Mom." As those words rang out, I saw Arthur rise from the sofa and walk toward the table with the posture of a man who had endured a lifetime but finally reached his limit. His voice was low, clipped, and as hard as a stone hitting still water. "Get out of my house, Isabella." She turned to him, perhaps hoping he would soften like before, but his eyes held no trace of hesitation. I saw her trembling, not from fear, but from rage at realizing something she never anticipated. We were more clear-headed than she had planned. Isabella snatched her purse, gripped the folder tight, and turned toward the door so quickly her heels scraped hard against the floor. But just as she pulled the handle, her purse twisted and her phone fell onto the wooden floor. A small sound, but enough to make time pause for half a second. The screen lit up as it hit the ground, and what appeared there froze me in place. One clear line, deposited $4,500, Michael Isaac Escrow Fund. I felt the air in the room come to a halt. Isabella lunged for the phone instinctively, but it was too late to hide. Arthur and I had seen everything. In that moment, the fog ripped apart, revealing a truth too stark to deny. They were co-conspirators, not just in intent, but in action. A private fund, a shared account, a plan measured down to the cent. Isabella turned back to me, her pupils wide like a predator caught in the moment of false triumph. "Don't misunderstand," she said, voice shaking, but still clinging to a veneer of composure. "That's a private matter between my husband and me. It doesn't involve you." I stood still, needing no words. My silence held more weight than any accusation. Arthur took one more step forward. "Get out of my house," he repeated, this time not in anger, but with absolute finality. Isabella backed out like someone being expelled from her own illusion, then slammed the door shut behind her. The moment the door clicked shut, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. Evelyn Hayes calling. I answered immediately. On the other end, Evelyn's familiar cold voice rang out. "Eleanor," she said, no greeting, no preamble. "It's time to end this game." I stood in the living room, the very place where yesterday's confrontation with Isabella had exploded, and could still feel the aftershocks of the rage she left behind. Still, this morning, I had to erase every trace of resistance I had shown. All Michael needed to see now was an old woman still wandering inside the trap he believed he had so cleverly set. I stared at the phone Isabella had dropped. The notification Michael Isaac Escrow Fund still burned into my mind like a wound that hadn't healed. And I reminded myself that I was dealing with two people who no longer valued their parents' lives. But I also understood that I was no longer the prey. I had to become the hunter. Before launching my counterplan, I picked up the phone and called Michael, forcing my voice to tremble slightly, adding a bit of hesitation, like someone who hadn't slept all night. "Michael," I said, letting a drawn-out sigh fill the space between words. "I want our family to have dinner together. I feel bad for being a little tense the other day." There was a long enough silence on the other end for me to picture suspicion flashing across his eyes. But then I heard his voice soften, unnervingly smooth. "All right, Mom, tonight then. I'll bring wine." My heartbeat slowed. He took the bait. He believed I was back on the path he laid out, believed I had weakened, believed I still knew nothing. The moment the call ended, I phoned Evelyn and recounted every word in his voice. She wasn't surprised. Evelyn said the police were ready to install cameras, mics, and thermal sensors in my home. "We need him to reveal everything," she said. "This dinner won't be his. It'll be yours." By noon, 2 plainclothes officers arrived, working swiftly and discreetly, tucking wires along the walls, hiding cameras high up, slipping microphones beneath table edges. When they left, the house looked unchanged, but the air had shifted, as if the entire room was holding its breath. For a moment, I knew would decide my son's fate. I looked around, checked every detail, then took a deep breath and whispered, "This is your stage, Michael." That afternoon, I opened the cabinet where Arthur kept the old recorder and placed a backup device beneath the chair just in case Michael got suspicious and tried to sabotage it. Arthur saw me do it, his eyes filling with emotion. "Eleanor, are you sure you want to do this yourself?" I turned, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I have no other choice. He'll make his move whether I stand still or not. At least now I'm giving him a taste of his own trap." Arthur said nothing more, but I saw the painful pride in his eyes. I knew he was angry, sorrowful, and desperate to protect me, to the point his heart looked ready to break. About an hour before Michael arrived, I went into the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and spent several minutes staring at my reflection. A face that had once smiled when her son first learned to run, that had once trembled when he had a fever, that had once cried on his wedding day. Now, that same face had to be sharper than ever to confront her own flesh and blood. I no longer saw weakness in my eyes, only something else, the cold clarity of someone betrayed to the bone. "If you want your mother's corpse," I said slowly to the woman in the mirror, "then I'll give you your own sentence." My face didn't flinch. My hand didn't shake. I felt as if I had stepped into another version of Eleanor Grant, one Michael never imagined his mother could become. While setting the dinner table, I heard the chime of the smartwatch Michael had accidentally left behind the last time he helped clean my kitchen. I opened it, already knowing his passcode from habit. A message popped up from Isabella just as I stood near the window. "Tonight ends it." Those 3 words were colder than anything I'd ever seen in my life. It felt like someone had placed a hand on my back and pushed me toward an abyss. But I was calmer than I expected. I took a screenshot, sent it to Evelyn, then put the watch back exactly where it was, not for Michael to see, but to ensure he never knew I had seen through his final disguise. As night fell, I turned on a few soft yellow lights around the house to create the illusion of a peaceful home, a simple family dinner. But I knew inside, every light, behind every wall, in every cabinet corner, were the eyes of the law watching every breath. Arthur didn't eat all afternoon, but he tried to appear normal when I brought out 2 glasses of water. "You'll be fine," I whispered. He replied, "as long as you don't forget your role." Michael arrived on time. The moment he stepped into the living room, it took me only a second to recognize the mindset of a predator ready to finish his prey. His eyes scanned the house, pausing at every corner to ensure nothing seemed out of place. But I had cleared everything that might spark his suspicion. He stepped forward and hugged me, a light embrace, but his hand was chilling. "Feeling better, Mom?" he asked, voice sweet like a mask. "Sorry about being a little confused the other day," I answered, clutching the hem of my shirt like a forgetful old woman. We sat down at the table. Michael opened the bottle of wine he brought and poured my glass first. This time I watched him pour, watched each drop of wine fall in a deep red stream, then watched how he slid the glass toward me. "Drink up, Mom," he said, his face calm as if nothing mattered more. I lifted the glass, feeling the weight of the glass itself and the far heavier weight of murderous intent sitting right in front of me. But I didn't drink. Instead, I set the glass down gently but firmly enough to catch his attention. Michael looked up at me, blinking once in faint surprise. I stared at him for a long time, long enough for every breath in the room to seem frozen. "Are you really sure you can go through with it, Michael?" I asked. My voice didn't tremble. It wasn't soft, it wasn't weak. It was the voice of someone who already knew the answer, but wanted him to say it aloud before the entire house exploded in truth. The question I threw out cut straight through Michael's mask. He sat still for 2 seconds, long enough to realize I was no longer playing the senile old woman. Then he smiled that familiar smile, the one of a man who believes he's always in control. "You worry too much, Mother," he said, pushing the wine glass slightly closer to me. "You should rest. Once you're gone, everything will be easier for everyone." He said it in a low, gentle voice, like soothing a patient, but every word slammed into me like a hammer. My heart didn't break anymore. It turned to stone. Arthur sat at the head of the table, hands clasped, looking straight at the son he had raised with everything he had. His gaze was no longer panicked. It was silent, dark, like a man who had lost his child, but still had to face the breathing corpse in front of him. "Say that again," Arthur said, his voice low and slow. Michael gave a forced smile. "Don't stress, Dad. I meant she needs care." I looked at him at the way he lay without flinching. That was no longer my Michael. That was a beast accustomed to tearing flesh without needing to hide its fangs. While he talked, I leaned as if to reach for a napkin. As I did, I saw his reflection in the tiny camera hidden by the cabinet leg. Every movement was recorded, every hand lift, every glance, every eroding look. Minutes later, he stood up claiming he'd wash up before dessert, but I knew he was going to check whether the pills had fully dissolved. He went to the kitchen, bent over the trash, and switched the placement of my 2 pill packs. I saw it all live through the small watch screen under the table. He took a new blister pack from his pocket and placed it next to the sugar jar like it was routine. When he returned to the table, Arthur and I remained silent. It wasn't fear. It was a cold resolve. We had been in this position for 3 months, watching him play the dutiful son, placing fake vitamin pills, offering caring touches that masked a drawn-out poisoning plot. He continued the act, but this time we didn't follow the script. He sat down, propped his arm on the table, and stared at me like monitoring a prey's breathing. "Drink your wine, Mom," he said softly. "Relax." I swirled the glass, but never let the wine touch my lips. "How many times have you switched my pills now?" I asked, my voice low but sharp. Michael's face froze. He blinked once, then leaned back in his chair. "What nonsense are you saying?" he muttered, feigning fatigue, but his eyes tightened and his lips pressed into a tense line. I felt Arthur shift slightly, ready to spring if Michael moved toward me. The air thickened until I could hear the hum of the AC crawling in the corner. I watched Michael's strained smile, then caught him glancing at the coat rack where his duffel bag was already in place. That wasn't a dinner bag. It was the bag of someone ready to vanish after finishing something dirty. Just then, my phone vibrated with a message from Evelyn. "Leave the house as planned." I stood, one hand gripping the table edge for support. Arthur followed, playing the concerned husband. "Mom's not feeling well," I told Michael. "We're going to the doctor." He didn't stop us, didn't ask, didn't show concern. He just looked at me like someone sealing a profitable deal. He nodded and said, "You two go. I'll clean up and come by later." I could hear the urgency hidden in his tone. He wanted us to finish the rest of his plan. Arthur and I stepped out. The door had barely shut behind us when plainclothes officers followed us to the car. I sat in the seat, fists clenched, staring through the window at the home I'd lived in nearly all my life, a house full of memories, now holding the darkest secret I'd ever uncovered. Evelyn called. "My team is ready," she said. "He won't escape." As we left, the cameras in the house captured every move Michael made. He returned to the dining table, lifted the wine glass I hadn't touched, inspecting its bottom, eyes gleaming, thinking his plan was seamless. He opened the cabinet, pulled out the new medicine bottle, and replaced the old pack. He walked through the house, checking for any tools he might have left behind. Then he grabbed the duffel, climbed the stairs to collect a few more items. When he pulled open the drawer, the corner camera recorded an image that made the officers hold their breath. A bundle of passports, rolls of cash, a folding knife, and a plane ticket. The ticket bore one name, Michael Grant. There was no Isabella. Elsewhere, Isabella had just arrived. She stood at the door, scanned her surroundings, then texted Michael. "Anyone watching?" Michael ignored the question, replying only, "Everything's ready." She entered minutes later, her face tense but composed. When she saw the suitcase open on the bed, I knew she understood. "Where's my ticket?" she asked. Michael said coldly, "I booked it. You'll board after me. Just handle your part." But there was no second ticket. He planned to leave her, erase the evidence, maybe even pin it all on her. It was clear in every gesture, every breath, every glance caught on camera. Isabella was stunned, but didn't dare react. She knew Michael's brutal power. She also knew she was expendable. Police waited for the moment when the two of them packed the money, passports, and poison into the suitcase. When Michael zipped the bag shut and walked out with Isabella, the officer's eyes sharpened on the camera feed. "They're exiting the house," one officer reported through the radio. "Stand by." Outside patrol cars were stationed at both ends of the street. Arthur and I sat 1 block away in a police vehicle watching the live feed. My heart pounded, but my eyes never left the image of the son about to flee from his own crimes. Michael locked the door, turned to Isabella, and grabbed her wrist like tugging a possession. They stepped onto the street, approaching the parked car. And then, red and blue lights flared. 2 police cars rushed in from both ends, sirens blaring like knives through the air. Michael froze, eyes wide, spinning around like a beast cornered at the edge. "Hands up," an officer shouted. Isabella screamed, dropped the suitcase, but Michael just stood there, stunned. After the police stormed in and Michael was forced to kneel beside the car, flashing red and blue lights sweeping across his face, everything unfolded so quickly that I couldn't fully grasp it. I sat inside the tactical unit vehicle, watching my son get handcuffed, his expression shifting from arrogant to frantic. But it wasn't until we were brought to the investigative headquarters that I saw the full extent of the nightmare he and Isabella had orchestrated over the past 3 months. The medical tests were carried out that very night. The doctor informed me that traces of a slow-acting toxin were found in all my samples, blood, hair, and even fingernails. This particular toxin weakens the heart, causes dizziness, blurs memory, and mimics the symptoms of cognitive decline. The symptoms Michael had reported to Dr. Reed weren't due to aging or illness. They were the result of every drop of poison he slipped into my daily meals. 3 months of being poisoned by the very son I gave birth to? Hearing that felt like I had shattered into 1,000 pieces. Isabella was separated for a private interrogation. Just hours later, news of her confession reached Evelyn and the police. Isabella had completely broken down. In the interrogation room, she confessed to everything. She said Michael was the mastermind, that he recruited her, coerced her to perform, and controlled every financial transaction in their joint account. She cooperated to reduce her sentence, but her testimony revealed a chilling coldness in her character. At several points, I felt my heart tighten as I listened. A woman once masked by politeness and grace was now exposed as a co-conspirator, trembling only upon learning that Michael had never arranged an escape plan for her. He intended to flee alone, leaving her to bear all the blame. But the moment that took my breath away was when the officers let me stand outside the interrogation room behind the one-way mirror. Michael sat there, hair disheveled, his face bruised from hitting the pavement during the arrest. He screamed when he saw my shadow through the glass. "You set me up! You killed me!" He wasn't crying like a child throwing a tantrum. He was screaming like someone who could no longer accept that he'd lost control. I looked at him, the son I once cradled in my arms, lulled to sleep during Arthur's night shifts, taught how to tie his shoes. But now he was no longer my son. I gently touched the cold glass and whispered, even though he couldn't hear me, "No, you killed yourself." The trial took place a few weeks later. All the evidence was presented, security footage of him pouring poison into my wine, switching medications, planning the escape, and the messages he sent Isabella. His lawyer tried to argue financial pressure, claimed he was manipulated by Isabella, and cited mental instability, but nothing could save him from the truth. Michael was sentenced to life without parole. Isabella received decades in prison. She wouldn't see freedom until her hair turned white. Two people who once thought they were clever enough to make my death look like a seamless accident would now spend the rest of their lives behind bars. After the trial, we began packing up the old house, not because I wanted to forget, but because I wanted to personally clear out the battlefield Michael had turned into a murder plot scene. While pulling out my drawer, I found a small notebook. It was Michael's journal from years ago, before he married Isabella. I opened the first page and saw a single line etched so deeply it nearly tore the paper. "When I have money, I'll leave this place." That sentence hit like a cold blade. I realized the most painful truth of all. Michael didn't betray me in those 3 months. He had betrayed me years ago. His hatred wasn't born from Isabella or financial stress. It was something he had nurtured in silence, like a dormant disease. When I handed the notebook to Arthur, he sat on the sofa, flipping through the pages with trembling hands. I saw his eyes redden. "I thought he just needed more time," Arthur said quietly. "I didn't know he'd felt this way for so long." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "We were both deceived," I replied. "But being deceived doesn't mean we were foolish. It means we loved him too much." In the end, we sold the old house. A home once warm and full of life had become a crime scene. Bottles of switched medicine, glasses laced with poison, and conversations built on deception. I couldn't bear to live in a place where every nail, every door reminded me of a child's betrayal. We moved into a smaller, brighter, quieter apartment. I hung a new painting in the living room, opened the curtains every morning, and slowly learned how to breathe again without the scent of fear. Yet every night before I sleep, I remember the last thing I said to Michael, the words I know he'll replay for the rest of his life in prison. A sentence not meant to destroy him, but to break the bond that once shackled me. Some children are not born to love their parents. Some children are born to test how strong their parents are when facing the darkness crafted from their own blood. If you've made it this far, I hope my story reminds you of one thing. Kindness should never be blind, and love must be paired with clarity. Always observe, listen, and protect yourself, even from those who share your blood. If this story has made you reflect, leave a comment so we can talk. And if you'd like to hear more real-life stories like this, follow the channel and share it so others can realize that sometimes the darkness comes from where we least expect it.